Hello? Do. What the heck is going on here? Can't hear myself. Don't know what's going on. Do. Why? Do. Do. Hello? Good morning. Uh, do. Hello? Trying to get this working. I don't see sound at all. Um, hmm. Hello. No, keep that one. Where's my audio? Where is my audio? Do. Trying to. Sound is not. No, can't hear. I don't see anything. Desktop audio. Do. Ba-da-ba. Hmm. Okay, that's on. What is going on with my sound? Ah, why, oh why is my audio not? Hello? Don't know why there's no audio. Do. Yeah, headphones are on. Uh, Not muted. It's just not picking up any sound. What is going on? Oh, you can hear me? You can hear me? Okay. This my audio mixer is not showing that it's picking anything up. No, everybody. If you can hear me, then I can talk. So, okay. All these technical difficulties and things. Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome to Debate a Therapist. While I work on getting some guests in here, if anybody's going to come in. Yeah, I apparently I had to add a thing to the audio mixer to show my microphone, but I can see now that it's working. Do. So, all right. So today's debate a therapist topics are actually right up here. And everybody, welcome this guy right here. This is Carl Jung wearing the beard of empathy. Um, the backseat manager. The back seats are always folded down so the dog can be there. But topics up in that corner. I find that there's no convincing evidence for extraterrestrial visitations, ghosts, spirits, and the supernatural. Cryptids like Bigfoot, Nessie, the Mothman, things like that. Crackpot conspiracy theories, everything from flat Earth to moon landing denial. Those are there's no evidence for any of that. And God, creation, heaven, hell, all the religious stuff. There, I don't find that there's any convincing evidence for any of that either. At some point, hopefully, somebody will call in to challenge me on one of those particular topics. Until then, I was thinking about looking at some of the histories for stuff like extraterrestrial visits. One of the earliest recorded alien abduction stories that is clearly an alien abduction story. It comes from uh, Betty and Barney Hill, a couple of people. They reported their first alien abduction story in 1963, I think it was. It was either 63 or 68. It's the classic uh, alien abduction story. They were driving along a road. There's a bright light. Alien craft landed. They were taken on board, and then sort of psychic communications. Most of the memories were actually recovered, so to speak, quote unquote recovered, during episodes of hypnosis with a therapist, which uh, has been shown to be a big problem because it can lead to false memories. All sorts of problems have come up, ethical issues in the counseling and therapy field because false memory syndrome is a thing that can very easily happen with therapists. Asking leading questions of a client that can formulate an idea in that client's head that can lead to the development of a false memory. Somebody can come to believe in this false memory so intensely that it itself can be traumatic when in fact the event that the person is remembering never happened. It didn't happen in real life. It can be devastating for a person to go through experiencing traumatic stuff from childhood and then to be confronted with the fact that it never happened and that sometimes it's impossible for it to have happened at all. That can lead people to some very severe crises, which is why it's very important for a therapist to avoid asking the leading type questions when it comes to any kind of forgotten things from childhood. It can be very difficult to navigate that as a therapist. It's all in the questions that are asked. Leading questions like that are attempting to be good faith and attempting to be things like what was the lighting like in the room you were in. That also builds in it builds in part of the memory. There's, who says a thing happened in a room? Could have happened outside. The big question is like where do you think this happened? And things like that. And I've worked with clients that I've had to tiptoe around those kinds of things. Sometimes it doesn't matter whether an event actually happened. What matters in the moment is that the client thinks that it happened, and they still have this detail. So I don't like to try and go into details when it comes to memory retrieval things. If your brain's going to remember something, it's going to do it on its own. Um, if an event actually happened, you're going to get some snippets of memory. Sometimes you're not going to be able to remember things. And when it comes down to the loss of memory because of trauma, that is a real thing. It happens. But it's usually the specific details surrounding the actual event. The fact that the event happened is something that's very rarely forgotten. They might be like, I don't know exactly what happened at that point, but I know that something did. And it's the thing they always remember, that something happened. Many times when a person doesn't remember a traumatic episode and then in therapy they uncover a traumatic memory, that's not a real memory, because until that moment, 35 years later, they didn't remember that literally anything happened. That's not usually typically what we see with trauma cases. We might see a loss of memory about the details of an event, but most of the time, I think, never in my experience, if I had someone who just suddenly realized that they'd had a trauma that they didn't know they had. Um, Sometimes people have to be explained that certain things are traumatic because they uh, didn't realize that not everybody goes through that. But yeah, there's some things people and not everybody goes through that are traumatic that you might not realize were traumatic. Uh, but that doesn't mean that you've forgotten that the incident itself happened. Like, you just know that it happened. You haven't forgotten it or the details. You just didn't know that it was trauma. Um, you also were affected negatively by it in many of those situations. It's just not something you considered as trauma. The other side of things, the false memory incidents, are usually like person has zero memory of an incident or trauma happening from any time in their life, and then through therapy and the questions the therapist asking, suddenly they were SA'd as a child and they didn't realize it. The problem there is, where are the details? And if the therapist is asking questions that are trying to elicit those details that are too specific, then that can lead the client to make decisions in the moment. They might not even be consciously aware that they're deciding on the details that are going into the story. They're just in the moment, feeling feelings and confusion and confirming details that seem right. And unfortunately, if the event never happened, it never happened. And things like Barney and Betty Hill being uh, taken up on a UFO and abducted while driving out in the countryside, well, it's entirely likely that didn't happen. Not just entirely likely, there's no evidence other than their memories, which were elicited by a therapist under hypnosis. No evidence other than that this abduction, that these actions ever happened. So the only evidence we have of it is the faulty memory of two individuals who were under hypnosis and being led by a therapist into memories that there's no other evidence happened. It's one of the reasons why I don't believe that anyone's ever been abducted by aliens, because the only thing we ever get is the same kind of eyewitness testimony that we get with Betty and Barney Hill. You know, I've also never seen any evidence of crashed alien craft. 1947, Roswell, New Mexico is the first big one. Most people pop culture know about that crash, supposed crash. You know, I do think that there was a crash and debris, but it was likely an experimental something being made by the U.S. government. Weather balloons seem accurate. It might have been something else, something early attempt at a satellite or something like that. But it was most likely a military experiment of some sort, not an alien spacecraft. And some of the debris landed on the farm out in Roswell during a major storm. And it makes a lot of sense that during a major storm where there was a lot of thunder and lightning and high winds, that something like a weather balloon could get pulled into that, broken apart, and just rain down over a wide swath of area. That's way more reasonable and way more evidence based than aliens from a planet outside of our solar system traveled here faster than light, managed to navigate into our atmosphere without burning up or being seen by anyone, and then they crash because of a storm. Those aliens are pretty bright. They're able to have science and technology so advanced that they can cloak their entry into our atmosphere after traveling trillions of light years, and then only to be taken out by a stray bolt of lightning inside an atmosphere, and then they crash. I find that unlikely. If they have that kind of technology. And then a lot of conspiracy theorists love to, and the alien conspiracy theorists specifically, they'll point to any number of ways of their technology is so much better than ours. But if it's that much better, it shouldn't have been able to be taken out by such a mundane means. There's no convincing evidence for alien visitation at all. None that I've been able to see. There's just as much evidence for ghosts, spirits, and the supernatural. Almost every piece of evidence we get from ghosts, spirits, and other supernatural things tends to also be eyewitness testimony. Or some of the fascinating stuff about things like EVP, electronic voice phenomenon. Oh, that's so much fun because that's all pattern recognition and pareidolia. Uh, the human brain is so good at recognizing patterns. Like, it's one of the things it's best at. Pattern recognition and narration, making narratives. Brains do that the best. So we look for patterns in everything. We find patterns more often than we don't, and we even create patterns. Most of our behaviors are based on patterns that we've developed in life, and we continue those patterns as long as they're capable of keeping us in a homeostasis. As long as they keep us content, or as long as they keep us where we are functional. And the problem that comes through my door on a daily basis is when things have gotten to be unmanageable, unfunctional. Uh, the brain is always looking for patterns, and it finds it, even when there are no patterns. And so when we're looking up at the sky and we see a cloud that's shaped like a bunny rabbit, we go, hey, it looks like a bunny rabbit. That's your brain recognizing that that general shape is similar to that of a bunny rabbit because it's looking for patterns. And so to say it looks like a bunny rabbit. The pareidolia is that our brain is best at is faces. We can see faces in everything. You get two dots and a small little line, and that's a face. I mean, we say like all the like in America, you look at the light sockets and they all look shocked. Right? It's like two little eyes, really wide, and mouth hole, right? And then we plug something into it. But we see faces in everything. We see patterns in everything. We create patterns in our thinking and our behaving. But ghosts, they're just, we're filling in the pattern. Right? Electronic voice phenomena is absolute bunk. It's just our brain filling in patterns. It's the pareidolia. Uh, there's an example of that in one of those ghost hunting shows that I've seen. I don't remember the name of the show because they all bleed together and they're all ridiculous, in my opinion. But the The funny part of the episode was that they did an EVP experiment. We're in this house. I went up on the second floor in one of these rooms. It was supposed to be the most haunted room. They put their little tape recorder down on a table in the middle of the room. Set up a camera on a tripod looking down at the tape recorder so they could record the tape recorder recording the sound in the room. They asked some big questions before they left the room. Then they left, closed the door, and let it alone for a few hours while they left the house. Then they came back hours later, picked up the recorder, took it back to their studio, their home base. They have a big desk with a huge monitor across, and they started showing the sound waves and like all the sonographs and things, and they had it split screened. But on the top, they showed the video recording of the tape recorder, and on the bottom, they showed all of the oscillations and things, and the guys working on the computer, and they played the sound, and of course you get nothing but static and white noise, and then suddenly some sound, and they're going, "Hey, you hear that noise? You hear that noise? They said this. It said something," and they try and figure out the word, so they replay it over and over and over again. And they have the video at top synced to what they're listening to on the bottom. So every time they rewind, it jumps back and on the video up top, which is great because they were trying to demonstrate that timestamps were the same. The fun part that I saw, that I noticed, and I don't think that they did at the time, was that the camera looking at the tape recorder, there was a window in the background sitting up on the second floor. And as they were replaying this noise over and over and over again, it kept dropping back. If you looked really closely at that window, you could see a tractor trailer drive past on a road that was about 100 yards away. Might not seem much, but that sound that they recorded appeared literally at the same time as the tractor trailer appeared on video. It was the sound from that tractor trailer coming through, traveling from that distance across and hitting the windshield, being very, very low, but loud enough for the microphone to pick it up. And then the ghost hunters were doing their best to try and make sense of it, to try and find the pattern with it, because they weren't watching the video at the same time they were listening. That was done in post. So they wouldn't have been able to make that connection, but their brains were filling in that this random sound was a word. Their brain does that all the time. Your brain is really good at filling in things that it knows, right? I think something like more than 60% of people can read a word for what the word is intended to be, as long as the first letter and the last letter are in the right position. You can jumble up every other letter in the middle, and the human brain will still figure out what it's supposed to mean. Which is why we need to have autocorrect on some things, and we need to have spell checkers on our word processors, because we'll miss it, especially if it's just like an I and an E. I before E except after C, and then 15 other exceptions, so don't count on I always coming after E for some reason. But those things happen like that. We try and find the patterns and things. There's no pattern there. My favorite example of how sounds can be interpreted differently is the Laurel and Yanny debate from years ago on the internet. Now, the sound, which was a recording from dictionary.com pronouncing the word laurel, if you weren't reading the word with it, it could be heard as Yanny, especially when played over and over and over and over and over and over. People just heard Yanny, and then they couldn't unhear it. But it was literally the word laurel. But that's how the brain can confuse things, and auditory stuff is easily confused. We have way more auditory hallucinations than we do visual hallucinations on a daily basis. Um, in the mental health field, with schizophrenia and other disorders that come with hallucinations, we tend to see more auditory hallucinations, people hearing things uh, before they see things. People do see things. Usually they're um, unclear specters. Like most of the time, we don't see like a beautiful mind style hallucinations. Um, it's usually just things on the peripheral of vision. Uh, Dark shapes, if they do come into the center of vision, is like a blur. Uh, that's not saying that we don't see like really detailed hallucinations. There are some. Usually they're connected to delusions, and primarily it the still lack detail in the moment, but the person adds detail in their memory as they report it to themselves and then to other people. They're adding details in that weren't there, which again is a memory problem. Going back to extraterrestrial visits and the memory problems there. Oh yeah, and with ADHD, we do have a lot of mishearings of things. The auditory processing is difficult, and when we have less cues, and with ADHD, we notice cues less. Not that we don't see them, but we notice them less. Without some of those cues, we end up misinterpret our brain into misinterpreting something. Like as I mentioned before, if we're reading something and we see as long as the first letter and the last letter in the same place or in the right places, we can interpret it right. Sometimes we don't. And with ADHD, sometimes we interpret one of the beginning or ending letters being the wrong letter. And then we fill in the wrong word. And the same thing happens when we're hearing things. Sometimes we don't process consciously the right sound, and our brain tries to fill in what it thinks, what the pattern says it should be, and so we'll mishear things. That even without like ADHD mishearings, everybody can do that. It just happens way more with ADHD. But hallucinations, we tend to hear more auditory ones, because auditory information is a little bit more faulty than visual, as far as our brain is concerned. Um, so we end up having some mishearings, and then our brain tries to figure it out. And so the bump in the night, well, if I don't know what that is, I got to come up with some explanation. All of these topics up here, they rest on kind of the same thing, and that is the human desire for everything to have a meaning, and for us to be able to uh, quantify it, to put it in a box, to figure it out, to keep it sorted. As our brain doesn't like working. The brain does not want to put out a whole lot of energy. That's true in just about every species. There's a reason that snakes are pet rocks. Like they're really easy to raise as far as that goes. As far as pets go, they're not super cuddly. Um, they usually just sit there because they're conserving energy as much as possible. Most animals try to conserve as much energy as possible. And our brains do the same thing. A brain does not want to be burning energy when it doesn't have to. That's why patterns are important. Because when we're in a pattern of behavior, we don't have to think. We don't have to do cognition, which is more active, and our brain uh, gets. Yes, I know it depends on the snake. Most like the pythons. My wife's ball python was a pet rock. Um, Most animals don't go out of their way to utilize as much energy as possible all the time. And very few that do that. Um, it's all about efficiency, and our brain efficiency in humans is all about trying to um, utilize the cognitive processes as little as possible. We're, it's disadvantageous for us to be constantly thinking hard about everything. And even when we get people like, I can't stop thinking, I can't turn my brain off, it's usually the same three or four thoughts that keep cycling over and over and over and over and over and over. Um, there are some mental health disorders where that isn't the case, like manic episode. Usually, not manic episodes. Not usually the one or two ideas that go over and over again. It's a huge flight of ideas. Like just won't stop. But that's impacting a functionality. It's just not typical. And typical brains we see trying to conserve as much energy as possible. So if we can put something into a pattern and our brain can figure that pattern out, it's more about remembering and less about thinking, about cognating. So thinking burns a lot of energy. Remembering does not. It does way less. Like if if uh, if I ask someone to do simple math problems, a simple addition, um, 2 plus 2, immediate answer 4, because that's bringing back uh, recalled information. It's part of pattern. You know, it's so drilled into most people that 2 plus 2 equals 4 that there's virtually no delay between processing of 2 plus 2 and the brain giving the answer of 4. It's so easy to retrieve because it's such a basic piece of information. But if we change the problem, we change it from 2 plus 2 to 14,927 times 6.023 times 10 to the 23rd, well, most people don't have the processes practiced enough to make that an easy calculation. So we have to think about it. First, we got to process all the numbers, and working memory can be problematic. The more numbers we get, um, there's a reason that 10 digits is about as far as we go out with phone numbers, because most people can't remember more than 10 consecutive digits. Uh, it just gets jumbled, and sometimes remembering 7 is hard, especially with ADHD. It's tough, but we uh, we have to work within the memory parameters that we have, and the working memory gets filled up pretty quickly. Um, so when the working memory is filled up, it's we're burning a lot of energy in the brain trying to use that working memory, trying to do the process. If we're going to do 36 divided by 9.673, I can't do that in my head immediately the way I can with 2 plus 2 or 10 minus 5, but which means that I have to burn more energy doing the calculations, bring the process forward, plugging the numbers in, doing the process burns a lot more energy. So any system that we have in our body gets stronger and requires less processing power the more we use it. And we use it over and over and over again, it's going to get stronger. Uh, we have to work on what it is we're practicing. Some people do practice their math skills enough that any math problem I give them, it's going to process super quick and not take a lot of energy for them. But they practice it to the point that it gets that way. We all have things that we're like that with. We all have little tasks that are actually pretty complicated that we don't even think about when we do them. Sometimes we call that talent, but it's usually skill. And it's usually a skill that's been practiced over and over and over again. It's really important to practice all of our skills, because our brain is going to want to put it in pattern. When we get it in pattern, we do it more regularly, we do it more easily, and then we don't have to burn as much energy. It's funny that our brain is trying to do that in the cases of things like EVP. It's trying to use the pattern to fill in the information so it doesn't have to burn the energy. But the problem is that there's nothing in that pattern. There's nothing there. It's not part of a pattern. But the brain's trying to figure it out as if it was. So we end up with stories about ghosts and spirits and the supernatural because we have to be able to explain everything, and we're trying to put it in the pattern that we see. We do that. We try to explain everything. There's very little in this world that a human being is capable of saying, I don't know, and that's fine. There's very little. Most of the stuff we don't know it. I'd like to find out. It's either curiosity or anxiety. One of the two. Sometimes it's curiosity just because, like, hey, well, everybody's got a drive. We got to figure things out. We have a drive to build our understanding of the patterns. We want to put everything into the patterns. We're driven to try and figure that out because it's going to make life easier. If we know the patterns, we know how to manipulate things to keep the patterns going well. It gives us a sense of security. The anxiety can come in when we don't know. Evolutionary speaking, it's disadvantageous for us to be wrong about the noise in the bush. If we're sitting in the woods and there's some noise happening in a bush, if I think it's a predator and I back up and what hops out is a little bunny rabbit, well then okay, I was wrong, whatever. But if I think that it's a bunny rabbit and I'm not ready, I go, oh, it's just a bunny rabbit, it's fine. And what comes out is a tiger, well, I was wrong, and now I'm dead. So, thinking that something is not a potential danger is a disadvantage. So we tend to err on the side of a caution. And this is where cognitive dissonance comes in. If I'm wrong about something, that's dangerous, so I can't afford to be wrong about it. That's in the most basic portion of our brain. It's related to our amygdala, which is the gateway to anxiety, gateway to the fight or flight instinct. Uh, we end up with a brain that's just trying to pattern everything and difficulty accepting that not everything will fit in that pattern. And it's dangerous to be wrong about things, so I have to be right. It brings up anxiety and actually triggers the pain center of the brain if we're wrong about something. Because it's anticipation for that being wrong to be harmful to us. This all makes sense with our brain being the way it is. And we see all sorts of things. I mean, sometimes we want to see things, even if we don't really want to see things. And anxiety and fear will very often blind us to things. Will make things seem bigger than they are. It'll make things seem more dangerous than they are. It'll make things seem weirder than they are. And it will impact our memory, our ability to remember things, which is where we get into some of the cryptid stuff. You know, Bigfoot out in the middle of the woods, something's coming along. If anxiety is triggered by just the noises or the sounds, we look up and see a shape. Well, now you've got anxiety, you've got fight or flight telling you to either run away, which is what most people do, or go fight it, which most people don't. And so now my brain's going to fill in all sorts of details. It's going to try and help me figure things out, but it doesn't have all the details. Right? We can see examples of this in filmmaking. And so many times there's horror movies, or even not even just horror movies, but movies that want to create a tense scene, and you show our protagonist in the scene walking towards something that looks humanoid shaped or looks monstrous shaped, and then when they get up close to it and the light turns on or they shine a light on and it's just some piece of equipment or just tree branches stacked in a certain way. Like it's not an actual danger, but the filmmaking made it look like this is a danger, just to build tension in the storytelling. But it's based on the fact that that's how our brains work. The more anxietized we are, the more worked up we are in a state of anxiety, the more likely we are to interpret things poorly. Our senses are going to play tricks on us. Our brain's going to be operating faster and weirder than it otherwise would. And we're going to see things wrong. And then since we're already in a state of fight or flight, we're going to be looking for a way to get out of that situation most of the time. And then we back off. And once we're backed off and once we find we're safe, we try to make sense of the things, and our brain fills in the details that we missed, and suddenly the thing that was a small black bear that might have been mangy, or it might have been just an overgrown and fallen mossy log, suddenly becomes Bigfoot. Something that has a natural and reasonable explanation becomes a creature that we've seen no convincing evidence for. They've supposedly found hair samples and things that have all gone to labs and have never come back with any conclusive information. Or sometimes they do come back with conclusive information. There's one in Florida that was thought to be the skunk ape, is what they call it down in Florida in the Everglades. They thought it was a skunk ape, and they found some hairs. They sent it off to the lab, and it turns out that the hairs were from an orangutan. And funny enough, there had been an orangutan who had escaped from a local zoo or some captivity somewhere, and had been running around in the swamps in the general area. It had been a thing on the news for a couple of months, but not a huge thing in their local news. And so people have been thinking about the skunk ape for a long time. There was even a picture snapped of that orangutan, and you can look at it in the picture. It's dark, and its eyes are kind of got that photo reflective thing, so it looks like glowing eyes in the dark and a general outline. And some people look at that, and then they're not familiar with the outline of orangutan. They see it as a humanoid, because they are, but it looks like just a weird looking humanoid, and must be a Bigfoot or a skunk ape. It's an orangutan. It just escaped and has been running free. And the evidence we have, the photograph and the hair sample, both back that up. But there are some people who still will say, because of the cognitive dissonance and the problems with being wrong, they'll still say they're not wrong and that it is a skunk ape. They'll hold to that belief. This is one of the reasons why eyewitness testimony is not an acceptable form of evidence. It's not convincing to me. I know way too much about how the brain fools itself and tries to fill things in, and how memory and processing are both really problematic. The eyewitnesses aren't good testimony. They're not good. They're not good for any kind of evidence other than a place to start investigating. Eyewitness testimony is different from self-report on some things. There is a difference. We do have to take people's self-report about certain things, especially things like opinions, likes, dislikes, subjective experiences, what perspectives are. And if I'm asking that about mundane, typical things, it's pretty believable because we have other evidence of that. When it's about extraordinary things, we need more extraordinary evidence, and eyewitness testimony is not extraordinary. Yeah, well, yes. I routinely can't trust my own eyes. To be fair, my eyes are shit. Yes, that's true. Nobody should trust their own eyes. Nobody can. If you think you can, just go watch Penn and Teller, or David Copperfield, or David Blaine, or David something. Like, there's so many Davids in the magic world. But go watch a magician, and then tell me that you can absolutely trust your eyes, that they can never fool you. And you're wrong. Your eyes absolutely can fool you, and your memory can fool you. Your ears can fool you. Everything of your senses can fool you. So eyewitness testimony is the testimony of a flawed recording, which is why we look for other pieces of evidence, physical evidence, evidence that can be evaluated by multiple persons, so that an agreement can be made that yes, this evidence is, one, it exists, two, is accurate for what we think it's saying, and for interpretation of what it means. Yeah, brains have trouble with mirrors, but yes, we do have trouble with mirrors. Um, is it? It's not actually a flipping of things; it's the change of our perspective. Like the light's actually coming back exactly the same track, but because we're used to looking at it this way, but now it's this way, it throws everything off and our brain can't handle it. It's weird. Mirrors and our brains do not get along most of the time. But for most people, many people. There are people who really love mirrors, who absolutely love staring at them all day long. Pretty sure that the orange man in the White House would love to do that. If you just we could distract him just by putting up a giant standing mirror and just like in front of the desk in the Oval Office, which is a new desk because he took the old desk that had been used for decades and flew it down to Mar-a-Lago, put it on display. But mirrors, yeah, brains don't like mirrors. Um, but yeah, if our brains can be that easily fooled, then eyewitness testimony alone is never going to be enough evidence for anything. We need to have stuff that corroborates that. Eyewitness testimony is a great place to start. Start with eyewitness testimony and then find evidence that either supports or refutes the eyewitness testimony. But the eyewitness testimony itself is not evidence because eyewitness testimony is a claim. Eyewitness testimony is the claim. I'm saying that I saw X. I'm saying that I saw horses this morning. And that's absolutely true because I did. My wife and I drove over to the barn where we board our horse and we saw horses. I gave them cookies. Not like horse cookies, not real cookies, not people cookies. But yeah, I saw horses. That's a believable thing. And I have a little bit of evidence for it. Well, not only do I know that I experienced that, and I had one other person with me who experienced it, and a dog who was there. Not only that, but if I needed to, I could take someone over to where they are and show them that they exist, and they're there. But my eyewitness testimony alone should not be enough. The fact that it's reasonable that horses exist and that there's a farm nearby makes it more credible, but it doesn't mean that it's true. We do have some photos, not from today. We didn't take any pictures today, but we do have photos that the horses exist. We know that horses in general exist. We don't know that Bigfoot exists. We don't know that Nessie exists. We don't know about the chupacabra existing. There are claims. There are claims people have seen. Every time we've come up with any physical evidence that could corroborate any of those claims, it turns out to not be. Right? My wife said she did take some photos of Bailey today. I didn't know that. I didn't take the pictures. But the idea that these things exist when we don't have any evidence of them is tough. Like we might find there's supposedly a chupacabra found in Texas somewhere. And the pictures of the carcass, because it was a dead animal. The pictures of the carcass are well, they're terrifying. They look really weird. It looks like a crazy, monstrous creature. But when tests were done, it was determined that it was a coyote that likely had mange and had lost most of its hair and had been dead for a couple of weeks, and so was in the advanced stages of decomposition. It wasn't a chupacabra. There's no evidence of that. Some of the supposed evidence of things like that are like the goats. That chupacabra means goat sucker in Spanish, supposedly, as far as I've been told. And it originated out of Puerto Rico. and they supposedly the goats had the blood sucked out of them, and there's a puncture wound on the back of its neck. But we've done scientific study of decomposing animals and humans too. Like there are body farms where they do that, put uh, dead humans in different conditions to see how their bodies decay. It's actually one of the things. If you leave your body to science, that's one of the things that could happen. Uh, is very valuable information that we get. But we also do the same thing with other types of animals, just to see what happens as they decay. And one of the things we know that happens in exterior environments is that skin, as it dries, it pulls back and it'll create tears in itself. And if there's any fluid underneath of that, it'll leak out. And that's kind of exactly what we see in these animals that have been dead for a couple of days before they're found. And when we ask, people say, no, it's only been gone a couple of hours. Okay, are you absolutely sure that you saw this animal a couple of hours ago and not a couple of days ago? Remember, human memory is fallible. Now, if you can show me a video from inside the barn where that exact animal was, uh, like 3 hours before, well, that would falsify my claim that you didn't, that your memory is faulty and you didn't see it. But if you can't provide that kind of evidence, then we have a faulty memory system stating something, and we have reliable data saying this other thing happens. I'm going to err on the side of the reliable data rather than the fallible system. Now, reliable data is very important, but sometimes people take reliable data and interpret it wrongly. They interpret it to mean what they want it to mean, which is where we get into some of the crackpot theories, conspiracy theories, things like flat Earth. A lot of flat earthers, they take real data, real, reliable data, and the problem is that they then interpret it wrong. They interpret it using the lens of their experiences and not the collected data and processes from science. Whenever I call upon scientists or experts in the field for explanation, it's not because I'm putting them on a pedestal because they're the scientist or because I like their name or they're the expert. It's because they became an expert by learning the processes by which we collect data, the processes by which we analyze data, and then they've collected data themselves on the area that they have an expertise in. Then they've analyzed that data themselves, and they've then had other people do it. Replication is the reason. Replication is the reason why academic papers are written the way they are, so that other people can reproduce these things. When we get enough reproducible data, and anybody can look at the data, and most importantly, the process by which we gather the data and analyze the data, and you can do it too if you learn it. But a lot of conspiracy theorists, as far as I've seen, they don't do that. They'll call upon specific points of data and then try to fill in with quote unquote common sense. Common sense is not common. And science will tell us all day long that there's some things that we call common sense that just aren't true. We've done experiments with all sorts of things. Kids, for example, everybody knows, common wisdom, common sense says, don't give your kid a bunch of sugar because that sugar is going to send them in a rush and they're just going to be bouncing off the walls. Well, the reality is, after a lot of scientific study, that's not true. Sugar does not cause kids to go bouncing off the walls. Getting a treat sends them bouncing off the walls, especially if there's other kids around who don't get a treat, because then They like to lord it over. It's like, oh, I'm so happy that I got the privilege of getting a treat and you didn't. Ha ha, I love that. Like, kids do it all the time. It's getting a treat. And we know that because we did experiments where we gave kids sugar or high sugar treats and watched the way they reacted. And then we gave them non sugary treats, salty snacks, and watched how they reacted. And then we gave them neutral flavored snacks and watched how they reacted. And we saw that when the thing that we're giving them is presented as a treat or a reward, they will have a response where they're bouncing off the walls. If it's presented as not a treat or reward, they're less likely to bounce off the walls. And it doesn't matter what it is you're giving them. It can be a neutral flavored thing. If they think it's a treat, they're going to bounce off the walls. If they don't think it's a treat, it's going to be a mundane thing. They're not going to bounce off the walls. Now, we should be paying attention to the nutritious value of the things we're given, but the common sense says don't give sugary snacks to kids or they'll be bouncing off the walls. Except the science shows that that's not true. But any parent that I say that to is going to be like, oh yeah, right, yeah, no, you give the kids sugar, they're going to be bouncing off the walls, because that's what common sense says. But the science says it doesn't matter about the sugar content. You can give them no sugar added sweet treat that's all natural sugars, just sweet and like 0 calorie things like that. Like, there's no reason. It's artificial sweetener. It's not the same type of sugar. But a kid doesn't know that. So they're going to act a certain way based on the way it's presented to them, the way it's given to them, and to some extent the way we expect them to act. Kids listen. When they hear their parent tell the grandparent, you shouldn't have given them so much sugar, they're going to be bouncing off the walls. When a kid hears that, that's their cue to start bouncing off the walls. Because now they know what's expected of them, and that's how they act. Now, we get crackpot conspiracy theorists who kind of do that too. They start acting a certain way because of the way other people will react to the things they're doing. Don't give the conspiracy theorist ammo for a conspiracy theory. They're just going to go off. And then the conspiracy theorist is going to hear that, and they're going to go off. As they're kind of being given permission to. But I need more evidence for conspiracy theories. I know we landed on the moon. There's evidence that we landed on the moon. There is zero evidence that in 1967 we had the type of technology that would be required in order to fake the things we see in the recordings that we've had since the event happened. It would be, and it would have been cheaper and easier to invent all the technology to travel to the moon than it would to create the technology to fake the moon landing. Right? We also still have evidence today. Like University of Boston, there's a couple either earlier this year or 2025, they launched their own reflector onto the surface of the moon, and a high-powered laser pointed at the reflector will return a signal. Shows that it's there. If you're off by feet in either direction, you don't get a return. That's how we know the reflector is there, because it reflects off a very specific spot. It doesn't reflect if it's not on that spot. Even though in amateur radio you can learn about how to bounce radio signals off the moon, you absolutely can. You can talk to people on the other side of the planet using radio signals by bouncing them off the moon. You can bounce a laser off the moon, but if you're looking for a specific return of frequency of light in a specific way, you gotta hit one of those reflectors. If you're not hitting one of the reflectors, you're not getting the return. You're not getting it bouncing directly back at you. You're getting it bouncing at an angle. And that means you're not getting the same return of signal. So we know that we landed on the moon. We've put reflectors there. We've been there. We can even have flyovers of the landing sites that still exist. There's so little oxygen and other materials on the moon, that the decay rate of metal on the surface is almost no, infinite. It'll break down eventually, but there's nothing to oxidize anything. There's no oxygen. It'll just sit there on the surface of the moon for millions of years, unless the surface of Mars or the surface of the moon shifts or gets bombarded again. It's likely to just stay there for forever, for a long period of time. It'll eventually break down, but it'd be much longer period of time sitting on the moon than it would be sitting on Earth. We've been to the moon. The Earth is round. It is an oblate spheroid. These are things, if you understand how to collect the data and how to analyze the data correctly, you can do the experiments that will show it. The problem with a lot of the crackpot conspiracy theorists, though, is that they don't know the proper way to collect or analyze the data. Sometimes they know how to collect the data, or sometimes they know how the data should be analyzed. But then you can know one and be okay. Like if you know how to collect the data, that's fine. You can get somebody else to analyze it. When it comes to the other way around, if you don't know how to collect the data properly, your analysis is going to be flawed. And that's what happens with most flat earthers. They're not collecting the data properly. So they're starting with a flawed premise in their observations. They just want to put it out there. They've got to be right. There's a profile, psychological profile of conspiracy theories that includes that aspect. That I've got to be right. I need to be right. And I need to be special for being right. Nobody else knows the things that I know. That makes me special. Next time you're listening to a conspiracy theorist talk, remember that one. Because you'll start picking up on the way they talk about things. And you're going to hear phrases that they're going to use that are going to indicate that they need to be the special one. They know something nobody else does. Because they have a need to be special. I don't think that that's evidence for anything other than that individual really needs to have a little bit more support in their life so they can feel a little bit special without spouting untrue things. Looks like I've gotten through an hour. I've gotten no calls in that hour. So I'm going to end the stream here. And everybody, if you're watching this in rerun, say goodbye to Carl Jung. I'll have a different psychologist join us next time.